Hey, everybody. This is Mike Miller, and welcome to the Strike Up the Band podcast. Today on the show from the United States Air Force Jazz Band, the Airmen of Note in Washington, D.C., we have Senior Master Sergeant Grant Langford. Grant is a tenor saxophone player, and he's going to tell us all about the Airmen of Note and his career with them. Grant, thank you for being with me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Mike.
Okay. Uh, Grant, I think, got volunteered to be on the show when I emailed the the public relations folks at the Airmen of Note. I think I sent them a message on Facebook or something, and they were very generous to get back to me. So I appreciate him doing this. I like to ask everybody that comes on the show just a little bit about your background and how you got your start in music.
So I started playing violin actually when I was about 5 years old. Um, I had an older cousin that played violin, so it seemed like a cool instrument to play, and my parents were happy to let me start on that. So I played that for about 4 years, 4 or 5 years, and then I kind of got a little tired of violin. So as I entered middle school, I actually signed up to play drums, and the middle school band director said, hey, it looks like you've played you've played an instrument before. Would you be willing to? We have a lot of drummers signed up. Would you be willing to play, a different instrument? And I kind of didn't mind, so I said sure. So she just said, how about brass or woodwind? Again, I really didn't know what the difference was, so I just picked woodwind. And she said, okay, well, how about saxophone, flute, or clarinet? Well, saxophone sounded like the most popular. And so she said, you're a little bit tall. Why don't you start on tenor saxophone? So that's literally how I ended up playing saxophone. Now I've been playing for over 30 years. And so that's kind of how I started, just Chapel Hill, North Carolina, public schools in the band class.
Okay. Well, for somehow I thought that all saxophone players automatically started on alto and then moved to tenor or bass. So you actually started on tenor.
Started right on tenor. I think that's probably the most common thing is that young students start on alto, but for whatever reason, I think she just was filling up her band class. It was a little bigger instrument to carry, but I enjoyed it, and still that's my primary saxophone that I play is tenor.
Okay. And where did you go from there? Did you go to college for
So
music, I guess?
yeah, so I went from there. We actually moved to New Hampshire. I went to high school in a little town, best known for Dartmouth College, Hanover, New Hampshire. So, which actually worked out to be a really nice change because I found a really nice saxophone teacher named Fred Haas, still plays and teaches in that area, and so he kind of started to get me a little more serious about the instrument and really started to tap into kind of expose me to more jazz and improvisation. So, but yeah, from that point on, I was kind of hooked. I had a good buddy in high school that was a trombonist, and so we used to just hang out all the time, listening to CDs and practicing together. So that kind of sparked my interest. And then by the time I got to be a junior, senior in high school, I was pretty committed to, okay, let me see how far I can go with this. I applied to a bunch of music schools, ended up at New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, where I did my bachelor's. And so that's kind of the education side of playing the saxophone.
Okay. Does they have a big jazz program at NEC?
Yeah, it's actually,
Okay.
few people know, but it's the oldest jazz program in the country. Not a huge program, but very widely respected, has great faculty. I was ended up studying with Jerry Bergonzi, great saxophonist there. But they also had George Garzone and Alan Chase, Cecil McBee, Daniel Perez. So it was lots of great faculty members, small program, which I actually really liked because I was able to have such a great contact with the faculty and and a small student base to work with.
Okay. Yeah, but obviously I knew they had a fantastic classical program. I wasn't that much familiar with the jazz side of things there.
Yeah.
All right. So where did you go after school?
So after I graduated in Boston, I, like most musicians or most jazz musicians, moved to New York. So I made the leap to New York, where I lived for about 8 years. Ended up going out, and freelancing, and then eventually working with, got picked up and worked with the Ray Charles Orchestra. Ended up joining the Count Basie Orchestra in 2004, and I played with the Count Basie Orchestra for about 4 years, and then I auditioned for the Air Force Band, Airmen of Note, in 2008.
Okay. Wow, Count Basie, that's a pretty well-known band there. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to play with that group?
It was amazing. So for someone who hadn't toured a lot and hadn't been exposed to that level, that tradition of big band, it was an awesome experience. So I just immediately, immersed myself. Now, I mentioned before that tenor is my primary instrument, but the opening that I auditioned for on the Basie Band was on alto. So I guess that's something that also goes along with my career, is kind of that flexibility of, being able to fill. That was the opening. And so I did my best to kind of immerse myself into alto, which I hadn't spent as much time on. But I did have some experience on it and some good buddies that I enjoyed that always played alto. So that was the second alto spot. And so we traveled the world. I think we were out for about 29-30 weeks for the first couple of years. So lots of travel. Got to really understand what that life was, because it's like an athlete, you really have to prepare yourself for all the travel and wear and tear and being ready to play every night. We would typically play 6 concerts a week when we'd go out, and we'd go out typically for 4 to 6 weeks at a time. So
at the time you played in the Basie Band, were there anybody or many players still in there that had played, when Count Basie was alive and still with the band?
Yeah, and so that was one of the exciting parts. There were about 6 members that were still there. Butch Miles, who recently passed away, was still the drummer. James Leary on bass. Johnny Williams was a pretty big mentor of mine, and he was the baritone saxophonist, and Clarence Banks and Doug Miller. So list goes on, but it was and the band was led by Bill Hughes, who had been there since the mid-50s. So and people would watch us in rest stops and airports, and you'd have 20-year-olds like me, people in their mid-20s, and you'd have guys close to 80, and we're all laughing and joking and having a ball. And people kind of wondered, what is this group, of where the ages span, 60 years, and we're all just kind of one big, family.
Now, I've heard a rumor about the Basie Band, and tell me if this is true. Somebody has said that instead of dynamic markings being marked as like pianissimo to forte or whatever, that they use numbers like 1 to 14. Is that true, or is that just an urban legend?
No, that's not one I haven't heard that one.
Okay. Well, I will tell my big band director that he's been lying to me for years about the way the Basie Band works. I had a chance to see the Basie Band in like 1975 when I was a teen, fairly young. My cousin had a job in New York, and we went to see him, and I looked in the paper and it said Count Basie Band's going to be, I don't know where it was, some restaurant, and he took me to see him, that was a real thrill, being that young and having just started playing trombone at the time. And then I saw him again You may have been with the band at the time. It was sometime in the early 2000s in North Carolina. It was one of those small towns up in North Carolina, but
Hmm.
it was both shows were great. Um, so tell us about your experience of joining the Airmen of Note then.
Yeah. So, again, I was enjoying my time with the Basie Orchestra, but I had gotten married in 2004. And, my wife and I were kind of thinking about what's next and, having a family and things like that. And so I guess the prospect of just kind of being on the road all the time wasn't the best for our family. And so I started to think what the next options are. I actually started applying to some graduate schools, and then a good buddy of mine that I went to New England Conservatory with called me, and he said, "Hey, there's an opening in the Airmen of Note if you're interested." And again, I really had no idea what that was. So we talked for about an hour, and kind of, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Wow, okay. Washington D.C., still a great band. Talked a little bit about the military life, and so I came down to audition, kind of fully expecting probably won't get it, and I'll just come back to New York and continue my life, in New York City. And fortunately, I won the audition, and then I kind of had to take a deep breath and go like, what am I getting into? And so one of the kind of most surreal moments is that when I did accept, I told them, I said, well, I've got a big recording. Tony Bennett, and they said, okay, well, you do that recording, we'll schedule you to go to basic training for after that. So yeah, so there's a Tony Bennett recording called "A Swinging Christmas" with the Count Basie Orchestra, and a week after that recording was recorded, I was in basic training, trying to learn how to put together a rifle and march and drill with everyone else.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories from people that join military bands, and you have to put your heart on hold for what 2 or 3 months and go learn how to do all the various military
Yeah,
things. And one guy, I don't know,
absolutely.
Lance Laduke, who used to host the Brats podcast, used to talk about. He said if he was in the Air Force band, you may have known him. I don't know,
I don't think so.
euphonium player. Anyway, I think he said that you don't want to let the drill sergeants know that you're going to outrank them as soon as you get out of out of basic training.
Absolutely. So yeah, they had some fun, and we were required to play in the drum and bugle. So they gave me a trumpet, and then I think maybe an euphonium. Um, so I just kind of did the best I could, and got through the. At that time, it was 6.5 weeks. Now I think it's 8.5. But yeah, so that was my journey. And then since arriving in Washington D.C., I've been there for almost 15 years now. So it's been a really great experience for me. We do anything from our tours in the fall and the spring, big summer concert series in the local DC area. We've got our Jazz Heritage series, which features three notable jazz artists that we bring in for a recording / concert that goes out to radio stations. So we're very busy. We're releasing CDs usually about once every year or two. So it's been an exciting kind of, I guess, culmination of my career so far.
Yeah. Um, are you? Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the band and how they were started? I know it kind of grew as
Yeah,
from the Glenn Miller days back in World War II. I don't know all the
right.
details, but if you could tell us about that a little bit, if you have
Yeah.
time.
So yeah, sure. So in the Airmen of Note was the Air Force Band, dates back to I think about 1947, and it was just a few members at that time, coming off of World War II. Um, And then the Airmen of Note was created in 1950 as essentially a dance band to in the style of Major Glenn Miller's Army Air Force's dance band. Um, so it started out basically them playing in officers clubs and these types of military high level military um, parties and things like that. And from there, it kind of took off because one of its early leaders, and the band was great from the beginning because it attracted very high level musicians and in many cases folks that were being drafted into the war and there were musicians were saying, well, maybe I can get into this band as opposed to just being a regular airman or sergeant in the war. So because of that, there was a huge influx of talented musicians that applied and auditioned to fill these spots in the Airmen of Note. One of the earliest leaders of the Airmen of Note was Sammy Nestico, who obviously went on later to be a great Hollywood and arranger and composer. And so that's the level of musicians and people that were involved from the very beginning of the Airmen of Note. And from there, it basically kind of expanded on the mission to public concerts and high functions for presidents and the White House. And so it's continued to this day. Obviously more modern, but we still pay tribute to the heritage of the band and the Glenn Miller roots.
Yeah, I had a chance to catch you guys in concert in Augusta I guess it's about 5 years ago. And
yeah, I remember that one.
It was a fun show. What I mostly remember about the sax section is the Barry player had a bass sax, and
right,
he only played it on one tune. That giant thing sat there the whole time, and he only played it on one tune. But it was a good show.
I think we had to twist his arm to bring that out, and but there was a song that we had recorded recently that they decided to put bass saxophone because they had a soli with the bass trombone, and I think that might have been the only tour that he did that, but it was fun.
Yeah, it was a good show. Good show. So what's your typical concert schedule like there in DC? How often do you guys play?
Well, we rehearse pretty much throughout the week. We rehearse a couple hours a day, and unless we have a concert that night. Our schedule really fluctuates. Right now, we're getting ready for a big Memorial Day concert this Sunday. Sometimes we're also getting ready for a trip out to the upstate New York. We're playing at Rochester Jazz Festival in June. And so we've got some dates there. And then we'll, in August, we're actually going to Scotland for the Royal Edinburgh military tattoo. So we'll be part of a larger group, but playing essentially still jazz arrangements for that international audience there that features, I think, over 50 performers every night. So we'll do that for 4 weeks.
Oh, wow. I've seen some videos from that. Yeah, they get bands from all over the world for the thing.
Yeah, so it's going to be exciting. And that's my first time going to Scotland as part of the Air Force Band.
Okay. One thing I remember you guys doing a few years back that was so cool were those Christmas, what do you call it? The flash mob things.
Oh, the flash mobs. Yeah.
Where they would just show up. I remember one of them was at the Smithsonian, and
right.
I forget where else, but that was an interesting and very well done performance.
Yeah, the flash mobs basically came out of the sequestration period in 2013, I believe it was, where we were not able to travel and we weren't able to do a lot of our bigger public concerts due to funding. And so the brain trust at the time kind of thought about, well, what can we do now that we're limited and we don't have our travel budget and things like that? And so someone had the idea to try a flash mob. It was obviously something that was popular in that time. And so we rehearsed a lot for it, and the timing and how we were going to execute it. And I really, the first one really is great because you can see the surprise in everyone's faces, and as it kind of comes together and develops from a few musicians to our full unit that was participating.
How did you rehearse for that? Did you have to go to the facility when it was closed, I guess, and sort of figure out who was going to be where?
Exactly. So we obviously rehearsed it back in our squadron and memorized the music and got all that together. But then for the actual staging, we did show up after the museum had closed. It was at the Air and Space Museum, and so we could practice it. We ran it 5 or 6 times, and making sure there was several different things. Some folks had jackets on that had to be removed, and other people, there was, drum sets and harps that had to be moved into place. So there's a lot of timing to it that's not always seen, when you watch the video. You don't necessarily think about that, but when we look at it, we know that how much things had to go in place. And the video had to know which shots they wanted to get and how they were going to get there. And so yeah, it was those are fun.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to sneak a drum kit into a space without anybody noticing.
Exactly.
Or upright bass or guitar or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I think, it takes a little bit of advantage of the fact that in most times when we're out sightseeing, we're not looking around that much. So things can kind of develop around you, and it takes you a while to figure out that you're in the middle of a flash mob, which is the case for people that were visiting that day.
Okay. You're talking about your tours. I know you guys just got back from a short tour. You do
Right.
What, a couple of tours a year, you said?
We typically do a fall tour and a spring tour, and we geographically, there's a set regions for each 6-month period. So it's kind of a rotation of about 5 different geographical regions that are set up. And so once we have, we know that region that's coming up, our tour managers will set up a tour that hits as much of that region as we can. And so that's how our tours are built.
Any idea when the Carolinas might be on that list again?
I don't know offhand, but I do think it's definitely been a while, and I would love to be able to go back and play for some friends and family that are still in the North Carolina area.
Okay. Now, in addition to the Airmen of Note, you have your own band, and looks like you do a lot of freelancing and performing in the DC area as well, right?
Yeah, so a lot of us will freelance as well. It's that's what kind of started our professional careers. So, obviously working into the schedule of the Airmen of Note, but yeah, I do perform. I like to perform and play with some local groups, and have my own groups I set up from time to time and perform throughout this area.
Yeah, DC must be just silly with good players, because with all the service bands there. I mean, you got you guys, and you got the Army Blues, right, and is the Navy jazz band in your area too?
Yeah, Navy Commodores, the Jazz Ambassadors. So there's just there's an influx, and that's just the military musicians, and then there's a lot of great there's a lot of great just professional musicians of all genres in this area. And let's not forget that a lot of times when folks retire after their careers in the military bands, they stay in the area. And so you'll often see even more that have retired but stick in the area. So yeah, there's a lot of musicians, but I think everyone kind of finds their niche and different places that they work frequently.
Okay. I told somebody once if I lived in that area, I probably couldn't even get an Easter gig because there's so many players around. But
It's competitive. It's
yeah.
competitive.
Do you have a regular like small group quartet quintet that you play with, or is it just
Well, I think, kind of along those lines, there's so many musicians that I think it would be kind of impossible to get the same musicians all the time. So I definitely have a, group of musicians that I will try to call when I do have, local jobs. And it's kind of like, let's see who's available. But I don't have one set of working band that I
okay?
work with.
Yeah, and everybody's so familiar with the tunes. I guess you can pretty much just show up and play
That's right. I mean,
most of the
the
time.
level is so high that, maybe one rehearsal would be all that most jobs local area will have, and then we're off to the running.
Okay. Uh, One thing you mentioned earlier was of the Airmen of Note recordings, the CDs.
Right.
Where does one get those now? There used to be a website where you could download all the old Airmen of Note
Right.
recordings, and that sort of disappeared. And I have no idea
Right.
where to go to find your new recordings. Could you enlighten us on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it's a difficult thing with the licensing. Um, I think has been a hurdle. The website that you mentioned, I think the owner of that website passed away. And so that wasn't connected with the Airmen of Note. So I think that's why that website went away. But
Okay.
our last two releases, we have put them on our YouTube page. So I would say that would be the best place to go, would be the United States Air Force Band YouTube. And you can find our latest two releases there. And so
Okay.
that's the easiest way. The Jazz Heritage series that I mentioned, you can go to the Jazz Heritage series gets recorded and we send it out to about 600 radio stations. So not as easy to hear it, but you can call your local radio station if you have one, jazz station, and say, hey, are you playing the Airmen of Note CDs that get sent out? Because it's hard for us to track, but we send those out to every jazz radio station in the country, and we hope that they play it. I was just gonna say a lot of times it gets played, at Memorial Day weekend or July 4th weekend. We've noticed.
I know a couple of the Christmas CDs you guys have done are some of my favorite Christmas music ever, especially the Cool Yule. That was
Right.
really
Yeah.
good. With
And
the
I think that was that's the first CD that I actually played on since I joined the band. So that's memorable for me as well.
I like I don't know if it was on that one, but the Grinch song with the bass trombone solo
Right.
I think is my favorite tune.
Yeah, and we still perform that at most of our holiday concerts, and our bass trombonist, he's very, very good at playing that part. So that's a fun one.
Okay. All right. Any other goings on you'd like to tell us about before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot. I mean, again, it's my pleasure to speak with you. We do hope to get down to the Carolinas. I think what happens is that sometimes the tour region is just so large that we kind of have to go, which side of the tour region are we going to hit? So ideally, we'd be going to these areas every 2.5, 3 years, but in reality, it can be much longer considering how our tours are shorter than they used to be, and the regions are too big to hit everything.
Yeah, I understand. You don't do like the whole month-long tour like the Marine Band does.
No, they're out there a lot longer, but I think they only do one tour a year.
Yeah.
And Navy Band does only one tour, and the Jazz Ambassadors, they tour a lot more, but that's their primary mission is to tour.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, the Army Field Band was here about a month ago or so, just
Right.
pretty close to where I live. So, all
Right.
right.
They
Well,
tour probably 120 days. So a lot more.
Okay. Hey, Grant, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. I know you got a lot of things to do, and appreciate you taking time to talk with me. And I hope I can catch you in concert again here sometime before too awful
No
long.
problem. I appreciate it, and thanks for thinking of the Airmen of Note and interviewing us for this. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to seeing the podcast.